Hello, Deus Ex Machina here. I'd like to remind you all that I actually am God, and so I'm right about everything, and I only exist to turn a hopeless situation into a happy ending. Now, when I made the speech on sexuality, it was completely improvised, and my knowledge at the time of speaking was imperfect. At present, I fully understand the nature of the complex truth. The description section of that speech contains amendments of inaccurate statements given my present knowledge. Um, and so basically, as God, I am going to make love come back and turn a hopeless situation into a happy ending. Now, the world's religions evolved moral principles. And so from Christianity, when you get married, you say for better or for worse, for richer, for poor, and in sickness and in health. All right. Now, ultimately, because I'm God, I also have telepathic powers. I know what everyone is thinking. I understand envy, schadenfreude, jealousy, uh, people's egos, insecurity, competition, evil plots of people against each other, and this, that, and the other. All right? And so on and so forth. Now, because I'm God, I'm also morally superior to all humans, and so on and so forth. So, anyway, thank you for the positive reactions to the sexuality speech, but ultimately, some of the stuff I said there was slightly inaccurate. The description corrects any statements, so on and so forth. Anyway, um, there are people who want me to be a 2-year-old, all right, or a 3-year-old because of insecurity, all right, because everyone's just insecure. Anyway, and so on and so forth. All right. So, in the sexuality speech, I must have said that my peak BPEL or bone pressed erect length was about 9. All right. And so, what is a bone pressed erect length, or BPEL? A male human stands up and gets fully erect, and then basically takes a measuring device and compresses the fat pad to the bone from the top. Now, BPEL is the metric for male erect penis size, because the entirety of that length is functional insertable length. And so if a male is maximally performing insertion, the fat pad is going to compress to the bone, and so the entire BPEL is insertable, roughly. All right? And so basically, I've stood up in recent times, gotten aroused, compressed my fat pad to bone from the top, and looked without parallax, and seen that my precise peak is precisely 8.8 in bone pressed erect length, which is about 9. All right, and so when I was saying that my bone press was 9 in that speech, that was roughly accurate, but my peak is 8.8 bone pressed. All right, now I have a picture because I propped up my camera or my phone in some strange setup, and I was able to get a picture without parallax where I'm potentially not quite at my peak, but I'm at least about 8.625 bone pressed in that image. And so that is a real image without parallax of my phone looking, roughly flush, where I'm that precise bone press. Getting a picture of your perfect peak is hard, but there I'm visibly at my peak. And so the measuring device is visibly sort of compressing my fat pad to bone, and so on and so forth. Anyway, now men are very competitive and silly beings, and so basically, if any claim of myself having a peak of nearly 9 bone pressed, they say, no, he's 2, he's 5, he has ED. And that's what their brains are thinking. I know what their brains are thinking because I know what every brain is thinking because I'm God. So anyway, now, ultimately, um, the following is the truth. All right. I used to go around saying I had a 10-inch cock. All right. Does that make me a liar? No. It means that the following. All right. Everyone is lying. Everything is exaggerating. And so in a world where everyone is lying and everything is exaggerating, I as well exaggerated, not because I'm a liar, but because everyone is lying. All right? And so the real way to measure male height, you take off your shoes, you compress the hair on top of your head, you stand up straight. All right? And so when I do that, I am only 6 feet 3.5 inches, not even quite 6'4". All right? And so, basically, a fellow who's shorter than me has been telling people he was 6'5". All right, he's not. He's even shorter than me. All right. Similarly, all right, the male pornographic industry exaggerates penis size, and so on and so forth. All right, and so myself with peak bone press of 8.8, with picture in which I am visibly 8.625. All right, that's a solid picture with evidence of myself having that bone press in that image. All right, basically, in the pornographic industry, an 8.8 bone press is exaggerated to at least 12 inches. And so it would be either 12 or 13 that they would exaggerate that to. Okay? And so, male height gets exaggerated, male penis size gets exaggerated, and so on and so forth. All right? And so basically, so I belong to the grower category of human, where my flaccid often, if I'm warm and hydrated, will be 5.5 inches. But if I am freezing or dehydrated, or let's say some type of muscular exertion is causing my flaccid to constrict, it could appear to be 4 inches. All right. And so, given many variables, freezing or dehydrated, or some odd constriction of my flaccid due to muscular exertion, my flaccid could be as small as 4 inches at times. But then, normally, if I'm warm, hydrated, and relaxed, my flaccid may often be 5.5 inches. And then, my peak BPEL grows to 8.8 inches. All right? Flush from the top, no parallax, pressing to bone, compressing fat pad, all insertable length. And then a picture I got with my camera propped up without parallax shows myself visually, all right, with the measuring device compressing fat pad to bone from the top, roughly flush, at about 8.625 inches, bone pressed and erect, and so on and so forth. Anyway, all right, and so basically, that is myself. Now, ultimately, 8.8 peak, porn industry is going to exaggerate that to 12 inches. All right, 8.8 peak bone press, porn industry will exaggerate that to at least 12 inches. All right, and so on and so forth. All right, so anyway, now, in my evolution as a person, I've learned how to maintain my peak erect size without erectile dysfunction or reduction. It involves strong legs, strong core, strong cardio, strong pelvic floor, and further you need to be hydrated, warm, well rested, not hungry, aroused by your partner, and so on and so forth. Okay, and so basically, when all those things are good, and then further your vitamin D levels need to be good. That improves erection quality as well. And so if you don't get enough sunshine and your vitamin D levels are low, you should supplement with vitamin D pills. Anyway, and so on and so forth. Anyway, now, basically, all right, am I a liar for saying I had a 10-inch dick? My brain did this because we live in a world where everything is exaggerated. All right, and so just like how my barefoot height is only 6'3.5", and the guy shorter than me has been telling people he was 6'5", similarly, my realistic peak bone press, unexaggerated, which reaches a maximum of about 8.8, would be exaggerated not even to 10 inches if I was a porn star, but the appropriate exaggeration for that bone press in the porn industry is actually 12 or 13. Okay? And so on and so forth. All right? And so basically I'll tell you what all this means. All right? So at present, given my accumulation of sexual experience, I can stand up and maintain my peak erect size for a while and avoid premature ejaculation. And so I've learned how to do that now. But I've learned how to do that through continuous evolution and ups and downs in my sexual experience. And so basically, evolution led to me learning that legs, core, cardio, pelvic floor, hydration level, temperature, vitamin D levels, arousal level, wakefulness and energy levels, well rested, not sleepy, preferably not too tired after vigorous exercise, and so on, I've learned all that needs to go into maintaining my peak size, and I can do that reliably now, given all my experience, so on and so forth. Anyway, while this is the case, ironically, my most recent sexual attempts were quite subpar because I was horribly ill with a very high fever and a virus. And so another thing that needs to be optimal to maintain your peak reliably in intercourse is your health. And so if it's flu season and you've fallen ill with a very high fever and a virus, the high fever is going to kill your sperm count, hydration level, and your general energy levels and libido, and lead to horrible erectile dysfunction. All right. So if you have a high fever and virus, you're attempting intercourse, you will not be potent, and so on and so forth. Now, why in the heavens would I have intercourse if I'm sick with a fever and virus? The answer was, I was quite interested in seeing a woman, but unfortunately, the constraint satisfaction was such that basically the only window of opportunity in which I could see her, all right, given her tight schedule, my tight schedule, coincided with myself being very sick with the fever and virus. And so it was such that basically, um, if I decided not to see her because I was sick, I would not see her at all, because I was going to be, going to another state, all right, in the coming days, or in the coming or in the coming weeks. And then she as well was in the area or in town for a limited time, is what she told me. And so basically, what occurred by irony is that because we're both on tight schedules, um, basically, I realized that if I were to see her at all when I could, it unfortunately would have to be when I was sick. And so by irony, all right, sick, fever, and virus stricken me had subpar intercourse in which I was not potent, in which I was largely having sex with her with my flaccid sides because of how weak my body was. Then all the men in the world would be very happy about that and say, see, he's a 2-year-old, he has horrible ED, he's weak, he's 5 inches, because my flaccid is often 5.5. All right, and so this was an experience in which I was fucking woman, weak and impotent, effectively, but given the fever and virus, right? And so ultimately, this experience was very interesting. Now, we had tried one more time when I was a little bit more recovered from the virus, but I was still sick and still not quite at my true peak erect size. And then my ability to control myself and avoid premature ejaculation was still somewhat subpar. And basically, this just wasn't that good. And so ultimately, the very first time I had sex with this woman, her and I were sitting down on the couch, and I asked her the question, how many times did you orgasm? Her consciousness said the following: I don't know, it was like 4 times, and my legs were shaking, twice on the floor and twice on the couch. Okay? And then she had actually bought lube precisely for the purpose of having intercourse with me, because ultimately I am moderately thick at glands, and so this woman was mounting a reverse cowgirl with her large backside, and basically her whole body weight sitting down on my glands for over 5 seconds. It was not going in, so she required lube to take me. So anyway, and so basically that very first time I lasted long enough without premature ejaculation for her to reach orgasm 4 times before I finished. Whereas the most recent time I had sex with this woman, I was still under the weather, kind of weak, didn't last super long, wasn't that good, probably wasn't quite at my peak. And then the time before that, which was when I was even sicker, I was nowhere near my peak, because I was at that time so sick with the fever and virus that basically I was having sex with her with my flaccid size. And so I've had a wealth of experiences that have led to my present level of enlightenment. And that present level of enlightenment also involves understanding why the world's religions evolved with their moral principles. The moral principles of the world's religions are good. And so basically, in Christianity, they say in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, and for richer or for poor. And so basically, if you're my partner and you want sex from me, but I'm sick with a bad fever and virus. I could have sex, but I would be not potent. I would be weak, and I would be having sex with my flaccid size. If I was recovered and healthy and fit and potent, like in my present state, I would be a peak bone press insertable of 8.8 inches, shaft girth circumference between 5.8 and 6 inches, or roughly 6 inches around, and then glans girth circumference of up to 6.7 inches around, which is actually very thick at glans, and so on and so forth. And so basically, in sickness and in health means you're committed in those ups and downs, and so on and so forth. But the modern world is impure and evil, and also men compete with each other, desire to see other men be weak, because of their insecure egos, and this, that, and the other, so on and so forth. Anyway, and so at present I'm healthy, I can maintain my peak, and I've learned how to do all this stuff, so on and so forth. All right. Anyway, now, basically, people may get confused and say, he's a liar. He was saying he had a 10-inch cock, but his peak bone press is 8.8. All right, officially in bone press. Well, the problem is that everyone's lying. All right, and so the pornographic industry again will take my peak bone press of 8.8 and exaggerate that to either 12 or 13 inches. Okay, and so if you ask Grok the following question, is a peak bone press of 8.8 exaggerated to 12 inches or more in porn? And then Grok, the first word detailing the first bit of information, will be yes. And so 8.8 is exaggerated not even to 10, but usually to 12 or maybe 13, right? And so on and so forth. And so because we live in a world where everything is exaggerated, I would say 10. I could have been saying, if I was a porn star, 12. All right, 8.8 goes to 12. Anyway, now, so on and so forth. Anyway, so on and so forth. So anyway, um, so anyway, so anyway, anyway, now, anyway, anyway, so anyway, now in terms of The Break or Julio Gomez, there exist sections of the internet called, of Reddit, like R Measured Porn Stars, where people do frame analysis of actors, peak erect size, and give like an unexaggerated bone press estimate. And so, for example, there is a frame of Julio Gomez or The Break lying down on the bed with his legs spread, erect, in the scene with Abby Love. And as a reference object, Break or Julio is holding his dick, and his thumb is there for reference to determine his length. Now, I am 6'3.5", and with relatively large hands. The precise width of my thumb is slightly less than 1 inch. All right. Julio, his porn profile would say he was 6 feet tall, but people have analyzed his height in comparison to his female co-stars like Alexa Grace, and have realized that Julio's realistic height, barefoot, might have been more like 5'9". All right. So Julio is shorter than me. All right, with short and compact legs, and then usually hand size correlates with height, and so he could have slightly smaller hands. All right, so on and so forth. All right. But genetics will also vary in terms of finger thickness and so on. Some people have thinner fingers, some people thicker fingers, so on and so forth. All right. And so Julio is shorter than me, but on the assumption that we have similar width thumbs. All right, I took that frame of Julio lying down on the bed with Abby Love, roughly fully erect, and then I basically went ahead and basically used his thumb on his dick as the reference object, and went ahead and made my interval for what an inch is slightly more than the width of Giulio's thumb. And basically, um, from the line that basically is sort of like at the point of attachment of his dick to his body, from the center, from where there's a visible line going along the shaft all the way to termination of glands, I got precisely about 9.5 sort of increments of that distance defined by slightly more than the width of his thumb. All right, and so interestingly, if you ask Grok what is the peak bone press estimate for Julio Gomez or the break, in one of the times I asked it, that Grok scoured the internet and said around 9.5. All right, in bone pressed erect length. All right, now typically bone pressed erect length isn't just going to measure from where the dick is attaching at the body and go to glands. It is going to actually, again, compress the fat pad to the bone and measure the full bone press length. But with Julio, the interesting thing about him is that he had a pelvic detachment, either because of a surgical ligament cut to extend length, or because of his sickle cell anemia and priapism condition causing naturally occurring damage, leading to a compromised suspensory ligament causing a naturally occurring pelvic detachment. All right, and so basically at the point of attachment of Julio's dick to his body, you can see signs of a pelvic detachment. All right, and so basically everyone has understood that he seems to have a pelvic detachment. This is known. And so basically, when you have a pelvic detachment, it is actually not fundamentally altering your bone pressed erect length. It is simply externalizing shaft that is normally within the fat pad to external viewable length, which means you are basically making more of the full bone press external viewable length by way of a pelvic detachment. All right, so that sign at the base of his dick is there. All right, and so when I say I got 9.5 increments of that width of what an inch is defined by slightly wider than the width of his thumb, all right, this is roughly his bone press, because basically the majority of his full bone press has been externalized by way of a pelvic detachment, which is why you ask Grok what is Julio's peak bone press, it will say around 9.5 after reading all the internet. All right, and so on and so forth. I did my own analysis, and I got 9.5 increments of slightly wider than the width of his thumb. All right, where basically that pelvic detachment is included in that. All right, because his full bone press is externalized with a pelvic detachment. All right, and so on and so forth. And so realistically, all right, Julio was not 6 feet tall and 14 inches. His barefoot was 5'9", and his peak bone press was around 9.5, with a pelvic detachment externalizing the bulk of the bone press. All right, and so on and so forth. All right, and so basically, Julio, as well, given his genetics and given his sickle cell anemia and priapism, he basically had sort of swollen tissue given his health condition. And so Julio was one of the thickest, in part because of his genetics, in part because of sickle cell anemia and priapism causing swollen tissue. He was also thought to pump for his scenes. All right, and so basically, if you compare Julio or Break and myself, you get the following. Myself, barefoot, 6'3.5", peak bone press 8.8, shaft girth approximately 6 inches around, glands girth up to 6.7 around. Julio, maybe 5'9" barefoot, peak bone press 9.5, 0.7 of an inch more than me, with basically the majority of his bone press externalized with a pelvic detachment. Shaft girth thicker than myself, in the 6.5 to 6.7 range, whereas I'm only 6 inches around. But then his glans or head of his penis is smaller or thinner than his shaft, whereas my glans or head of penis is thicker than my shaft, and so I reach up to 6.7 girth around my glans or head, and so my head has the same girth as Giulio's shaft. All right, and so on and so forth. Now, Giulio would often be exaggerated to 14 inches. In one random video, it said 15 inches. All right, and so he'd be exaggerated to 6 feet tall, 14 inches, when he was really 5'9", with a 9.5 peak bone press, roughly, with a pelvic detachment externalizing the majority of his bone press. All right, and so on and so forth. And so that was Mr. Giulio. Now, he had short and compact legs, and from certain camera angles, you could get the effect where he's looking to approach his knee, and so on and so forth. All right, and so this, that, and the other. All right, and so anyway, here's how I know that this is all the truth. All right, so basically, in recent times, I decided to get very fit and do a standing photo shoot as if I were a male porn star. All right, and so there's a picture of me standing up and erect, turned to the side. All right, and then basically, I found a frame of Giulio on the internet where he's kneeling and roughly fully erect and performing insertion. All right, and so I tried to make it to scale. And so to make it to scale, I made the size of our heads the same, the length defining distance from back of neck to nose. All right, and then I decided to make the width of the thigh that is nearest to the camera, the same. All right, and so that those were my scaling references. And so if Giulio is not quite at his peak extension, or if he's compressing slightly given insertion, all right, then him and I could look about equivalent length. Again, his peak bone press is 9.5, with the bulk of his bone press externalized by way of a pelvic detachment. My peak bone press is 8.8, which is all insertable length given my fat pad will compress the bone given maximum insertion, but some of my functional bone press length is within my fat pad. All right, so on and so forth. My peak bone press is 8.8. There exists a picture flush without parallax, which is proof of myself in that picture having about an 8.625 bone press. Getting a picture demonstrating my actual peak is a bit difficult, and so on and so forth. And so in that picture, I'm like 8.625 bone pressed. Camera is roughly flush without parallax. Measuring device is compressing my fat pad to the bone, and so on and so forth. All right. And so basically, I went ahead and did all this. All right. So anyway, so I have an OnlyFans, and I'm actually getting a bunch of new fans, and so I have like this Muslim woman is one of my fans, and so on and so forth. All right. Now again, I'm not a liar. Simply, the whole world is lying. So when I said I had a 10-inch cock, and I was sending out an email or like saying that to females in person, this is because everything is just exaggerated. All right. My peak bone press is 8.8. All right. In porn, that's going to get exaggerated to 12 or 13 inches. Giulio, at around a 9.5 bone press, would say he was 14 inches. All right. And so mathematically, 9.5 is to 14 as 8.8 is to 13. All right. And so basically, instead of saying I had a 10-inch cock, I could say I had a 13-inch cock if I was actually adhering to the porn star exaggeration scale. 8.8 goes to 13, so on and so forth. Anyway, if 9.5 is 14. All right, so anyway, long story short, the image where Julia and I are to scale, all right, roughly to scale based on head size and width of thigh. Julia was kneeling and performing insertion. He could be either not quite at peak extension or compressing slightly given insertion. And so basically, in that real image, our lengths from point of attachment to body to termination of glands look identical. Um, in the shaft girth, I am slightly thinner than him. My shaft girth circumference is about 6 inches around, whereas he was between 6.5 and 6.7 around. But then, of course, he has smaller glands or head, and I have a larger glands or head, reaching his 6.7 shaft girth at my glands. All right? So long story short, in that to scale image, our lengths look roughly the same. In shaft girth, I'm a little bit thinner, but in terms of glands or head size, I'm larger, and so on and so forth. Now, the regions of the vagina most responsive to girth are the outer third. And so basically, as long as I nearly pull out all the way with every single stroke, my girth around glands can apply equivalent girth pressure as Julio's shaft to that outer third of the vagina with every single stroke. All right, and so basically, again, the outer third of the vagina is most responsive to pleasure from girth, and so Julio's shaft would do that. So as long as I pull out nearly all the way every single stroke, my girth around glands can apply equivalent girth pressure to the outer third of the vagina with every single stroke. And so the second time I was having sex in my life was with a 35-year-old woman, 11 years older than me, sexually experienced. And she said that she had 4 orgasms and her legs were shaking, twice on the floor, twice on the couch. She even required lube when she was mounting me in reverse cowgirl facing away from me, sitting down on the head of my dick for like over 5 seconds with her whole body weight. It wasn't going in. It required lube for her to take me. Even though she was sexually experienced, it wasn't going in. And so basically, this down the other. This is because my glands girth is the same girth as Julio's shaft. Anyway, and so basically this woman was 35, white and Norwegian, potentially silver or light blue in the eyes, 160 pounds, flat as a board on top, but very large backside on the bottom, very large natural white backside, and sitting down on my dick with their whole body weight. It wasn't going in, requiring lube. Anyway, very interesting. Yet another time with this woman. She's not losing her virginity and not in her period, and so basically, even though she's not losing her virginity and not on her period, basically at one point she started bleeding, and she said this could happen with her and larger men because her vagina tends to get tighter as it gets deeper. And so basically, what happened is that, female vaginas, even for taller women like her, who's 5'9" or 5'10" barefoot, basically the maximum depth to cervix when aroused does not exceed 8 inches. All right, and so myself having a peak insertable bone press of 8.8 will reach her cervix, and then my very thick glands will cause pressure. Then my shaft girth is moderate girth, still thick, but not absurdly thick, right? And then basically she started bleeding, and so I was at my peak size inside of her, and she screamed, whipped her head around, and looked at me with wide eyes, and then she actually clenched her ass and pulled away from me a little bit, and then I pulled out of her, and a blob of blood came out of her, and so on, from some internal tear. Anyway, and so basically all this happened. All right. So anyway, so on and so forth. Now, and so there was the blood. So anyway, now, and so on and so forth. So anyway, now in terms of percentiles, having peak bone press of 8.8 is over 99.99th percentile. Having shaft girth of roughly 6 inches is over 99th percentile, but not as thick as Julio, who had shaft girth between 6.5 and 6.7. Having glands girth of 6.7 it equals Julio's shaft girth, but some males will have thick shaft but small glands, and so, but then some males will have will have glands that is thicker than their shaft, and so on, and so on and so forth. Anyway, and so I'm one of those males that has glands thicker than shaft, where I'm a solid 6 girth at shaft, but then 6.7 at glands. And so Julio's example of person whose glands was smaller than his shaft, and so on and so forth. But anyway, so some guys glands larger than shaft, some guys glands smaller than shaft. By glands I mean head. And so some guys will have glands or head smaller than shaft. Some guys will have glands or head larger than shaft. But anyway, now so on and so forth. All right. And so Julio's exaggeration was 14 for 9.5 bone press at peak. My exaggeration would be 13 for 8.8 bone press at peak, I believe. Anyway, so on and so forth. And so if you want to call me a liar for going around saying I had a 10-inch dick, note that if I was a porn star, the exaggeration would be either 12 or 13 for me, so on and so forth. Anyway, so on and so forth. If you see me walking around flaccid or something, I'll often be 5.5. If I am cold or dehydrated, or doing some muscular exertion and my flaccid is constricting, the smallest my flaccid would ever be is 4 inches, or something like that, so on and so forth. Anyway, so on and so forth. Anyway, so anyway. Now, yeah. So anyway, so I have an OnlyFans, and the OnlyFans has the picture where I look comparable to Julio. So I have a few fans, and then so on and so forth. And then I had sex when I was sick one time, and then I wasn't potent, and I was a 5 because fever and virus gave me ED. But now I'm potent. I can maintain my peak in sickness and in health. Anyway. Now, size does not make a male human better than another male human. Evolutionarily speaking, they are just good matches for each other. And so vaginal accommodation will vary by the female. Penis size will vary by the male. And so basically, a study was done to confirm this, that the Chinese women have smaller vaginal accommodation than the Western women. And similarly, the Chinese men have smaller bone press direct length on average than the Western men. And so, when both male and female are small, female with small vaginal accommodation and male with small bone press, then they're good evolutionary fits for each other. All right, and they're beautiful Asian couples who are connected intellectually, emotionally, and have shared culture, and that's perfect, and so on. All right, and so what I mean by vaginal accommodation is, as well as you have depth to cervix, and so some women, when they're maximally aroused and horny and their vagina is elongated, their cervix may only be 6 inches inside, others will be 8 inches inside. And so there may be some correlation with females' body size and height as well, with depth to cervix. But even for taller women, like the 5'9 woman, 5'10 woman I was with very large backside, her depth to cervix, really doesn't exceed like 8 inches. And so even for a taller than average woman, the depth to their cervix when they're maximally aroused really won't exceed about 8 inches, and so on. And so hence my size, even though she's not losing her virginity, not in a period, led to some type of internal tear and bleeding because of how tight, because she gets tighter as she gets deeper. And so basically, at one point, she bled, and so on. Anyway, now so on and so forth. Anyway, because I sort of caused an internal tear of my size. All right, so basically, in the picture to scale with me and Julio, it shows us looking comparable, and so on. And so Julio's peak bone press is 9.5. Again, my peak bone press is 8.8. Julio would exaggerate that to 14. My exaggeration would maybe be 13 or 12, and so on and so forth. Julio was not 6 feet barefoot. He was 5'9" barefoot. I am 6'3.5" barefoot. So when you're short and have compact legs, a 9.5 bone press could, from certain angles, look like it is approaching your knee, and so on and so forth. Then they exaggerate that to 14 inches, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so on and so forth. Anyway, now, anyway, and so yeah, and so in health, a woman had multiple orgasms with me, but then when I was sick and not potent with a fever and virus, it was not as satisfying. So on and so forth. Am I a 2-year-old for having sex when I was sick and not being potent? No, I'm just pure. And so if you love a woman and there's limited time where you're able to see her, all right, even if you're sick and weak, the answer is you should still see her. And the woman, if she is pure, all right, and knows you're sick, would still have a decent time, and so on. And so in marriage, again, in sickness and in health, your partner's sick, not potent, love him. Your partner's healthy, potent, love him. All right. Anyway, so on and so forth. Anyway, so on and so forth. Anyway, yeah. And so men that are smaller for women that are smaller, men that are larger for women that are larger. Ironically, the only woman that I've had sex with in a repeated fashion is a tall, large woman with a very large backside, probably with moderately deep vaginal accommodation. But even then, my size made her bleed one time. Anyway, yeah, so on and so forth. Now, anyway, so another thing I'd like to correct from that sexuality speech is I had conjectured that basically, I conjectured that sort of hotter temperatures in Africa, given homeostasis, led to superior blood flow to the genitalia um, during puberty, and in which the nutrients in the blood would, during puberty, build out the structure and size of the male penis. And if you simulate that better blood flow over generations, you get emergent larger penis size. That was what I conjectured. But I don't believe that that theory has much scientific backing or support. And so the theory that has more scientific backing or support is the life history theory, stating that high pathogen exposure and mortality in sub-Saharan Africa led to selection pressures for high testosterone males and high fertility or stradiol females, high testosterone males being more endowed and high fertility or stradiol females having larger breasts and backside. And so statistically, the African origin men will have a slightly larger bone press at peak, given higher testosterone typically, and then the black woman will have larger breasts and backside than the white woman, typically on average, and so on and so forth. All right, and so this seems to be why now, and so that fast strategy evolved in sub-Saharan Africa, given mortality and high pathogen exposure, is what the life history theory states. Whereas in the temperate regions, the strategy was slower with the white folk, and then the selection strategy was preferential to intelligence as opposed to testosterone and fertility and estradiol and so on. A slower strategy more preferential to intelligence in the temperate regions with the white folks. Anyway, and so on and so forth. So anyway, and so on and so forth. Now, given that this is the case, there are also white anomalies of either sex, and so by that I mean there are white women with high fertility or estradiol who may have extremely large natural breasts or extremely large natural backside. An example is this Norwegian origin white woman I've had intercourse with a few times, who is 160 pounds, but a good chunk of that body weight is just her very, very large backside that is so large that she would walk, and every step she would take, I would basically see that with every step she'd take, there would be a jiggling or oscillation of her backside. And so if you've seen animated pornography by Third Art, there's a character called Babs, spelled Babs, who has animated extremely large breasts and backside. Now, basically, there's some animated porn video of Babs where she's walking on some beach, and as she walks, you can see that they animated the subtlety of a slight jiggle of her backside with every step she takes when she's walking. Now, basically, this woman had such a large backside that with every step she'd take when she was walking, there was actually basically a moderate jiggle of her backside with every step that she would take. That was actually moderately noticeable with me walking behind her. And so some women will have, large backside, but like it, you know, you know, but this, that, and the other. But then this woman's backside was so large that I was walking behind her, and she's wearing like whatever type of pants, and I see with every step she takes, there's a moderate jiggle of her backside every single step she takes, right? So anyway, and so this was like real life version of Babs. So animated porn of Babs walking on the beach. They animate the subtlety of a slight jiggle every step she takes of her backside. And this woman is walking, I'm following her, and then I saw that slight subtle you know that perceivable jiggle of her backside with every single step she takes, and so on. Anyway, so long story short, what I'm getting at is that there are white anomalies, white women who have high fertility or estradiol who could have very large breasts and backside, and then there are also white men who have high testosterone, and so given genetics and also given testosterone exposure during fetal development, there are white men who are very endowed. An example is Matt Barr, who is a white British guy, who actually is the world's largest medically verified bone pressed erect length. And apparently Matt Barr is larger than any known currently working black porn star, even though he's white. All right. And so white women can have large breasts and backside too, and then white men can be very endowed too, and so on and so forth. Just statistically, on average, the African origin humans will be slightly more sexually impressive, so to speak, because of those selection pressures in the life history theory. Anyway, so on and so forth. Anyway, and so basically, um, you have the following, which is larger, taller women may be a good fit for larger, more endowed men, and so basically, it when I was healthy, when I had intercourse with this older woman, we're sitting on the couch. I said, "How many times do you orgasm?" She said, "I do not know, like 4 times," and my legs were shaking, twice on the floor, twice on the couch, because we did different positions in different areas. But then when I was sick with this fever and virus, I was reverted to being 5 inches or something, because my flaccid is often like 5.5. And sick and not potent with high fever and virus. I fucked her when I was, not potent and weak and sick. And it was interesting. She still had like 1 or 2 orgasms in the 10 or 15 minutes, in the 10 or 15 minutes that we had sex. 10 to 15 minutes. Anyway, so on and so forth. Anyway, so the picture where I look very comparable to Mr. Julio is on my OnlyFans, so I have a few fans. Anyway, and so basically there are going to be, so Mandingo the porn star, Fred, was like 5'7", with maybe a peak bone press of, in your estimate, of about 9, with about 6 inches of shaft girth. And then for me, my peak bone press, based on my own observations, is precisely 8.8, and my shaft girth is between 5.8 and 6. And so basically, I am roughly at peak 9 bone pressed by about 6 shaft girth, and so on. And so people tend to parameterize dick size at peak erect size by bone pressed erect length by girth. And so my peak bone press is 8.8, which is roughly 9. My shaft girth circumference will be somewhere between 5.8 and 6, like 5.9, 5.98, basically 6. And so long story short, mathematically, just to present the minimal amount of information in terms of max bone press by mid shaft girth circumference, you would say I am 9 by 6. But then I have the perk of thicker up to 6.7 girth circumference around my head or glands, which is nice for additional girth. And so as long as I pull out nearly all the way with each stroke, that additional girth can apply extra pressure to the outer third of the vagina which is the region most sensitive to girth pressure. And so I have Julio's very thick girth at my glands, but glands only, whereas he had that girth along his whole shaft, but then his glands would be smaller, so on and so forth. Anyway, so on and so forth. And so Mandingo is thinner than Break, and then I believe Hollywood Cash is perhaps slightly thinner than me, and so on, even though he's green lighted on blacked, and so on. I'm not white. I'm a light skin. I have both black and white genetics, and so if you inspect like old school China dance, one of my videos where I'm dancing in black and white, you inspect my face, you can see I'm a black man or a light skin, or at least a mixed male. And so my nose is naturally wide, my lips are thick, and my hair texture, beard and hair is curly. This is because I have some percentage of black in me causing those features, and so on. So I'm a mixed guy who's both black and white, and so on. And so the stereotype is that the blacks are more endowed, so people would look at me and say, "You're white man, you're probably small." But the people who believe that are the fools, because again, Matt Barr is white and the world's largest medically verified penis, and so on and so forth. And so there are white males who are very endowed, and so on. Anyway, now when I'm flaccid, all right, I'm often 5.5 inches, and so often there may not be any bulge in my pants if I've deliberately folded my dick up in my underwear and put on pants. And so when I'm going about being an intellectual not aroused, I don't desire to show any bulge in my pants. But in my martial arts video, Peace Through Strength, at the conclusion when I do my Kung Fu salute, you can see there's a slight bulge in my pants, which is my 5.5 inch flaccid rolled up in my pants. You can see that there's something there. Anyway, now ultimately, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so on and so forth. Now, anyway, there's a curse to everything, and so I don't necessarily envy anyone. And so basically, the male porn stars, they have a curse. Their image and their career is mainly associated with that vulgarity. And so ultimately, if you look at like Blackster.com, you assess those guys. You're like, would you want to be that guy? Like having your life and career associated with that vulgarity, doing that thing. And really, you could assess the pros and cons, and be like, there's curses to it. There's definite curses to it. And so there are many men who, are contributing to civilization in a more respectable, area of the economic machine, in the sciences and technology and engineering and politics and research. And then they have some partner or wife or mate in which they keep their sexuality with that person private. And so basically, having a private sexual life is not inferior to being a publicized porn star. And there are serious curses of being a porn star and so on. And so even Cristiano Ronaldo, in some interview, he's saying, no, I never wanted fame. All right. So when you're famous, you have the inability to have a private life. There's a lot of attention and pressure. And basically, there are serious curses to fame. All right. Cristiano Ronaldo, some interviews saying, no, I never wanted fame. All right. And so you're a famous porn star, same deal. The fame comes with curses, and the fame is associating your image with that vulgarity and so on and so forth. Anyway, now on my OnlyFans, which has a few fans, there's a picture to scale where I look very similar to Mr. Julio. Similar length, slightly thinner in the shaft, but then larger glands, and so on. Anyway, so on and so forth. Now, men are going to judge me based on my flaccid size, and so they're going to be grower humans, then they're going to be shore humans. Shore humans, they will not grow significantly from flaccid to erect. Grower humans do grow significantly from flaccid to erect, and so basically, I am a grower human. All right. So the smallest my flaccid will ever be could be if I'm freezing, if I'm dehydrated, or if I'm exerting myself and it's deciding to constrict, could be 4 inches. If I am hydrated, relaxed, and warm, my flaccid will be 5.5 inches. If I'm standing up and I'm maximally erect, my peak unexaggerated bone pressed erect length will grow to 8.8 inches. All right. Now I'm such a grower that me standing up erect to scale with Julio kneeling and erect performing insertion, I look very close or even comparable to Julio in that real picture that is to scale. All right. But then my flaccid at times could be very tiny, and so on and so forth. It's called being a grower, and so on and so forth. Now, some percentage of males are growers, some percentage are showers, so on and so forth. Anyway, and sometimes guys get random boners, and so in some pictures, a guy could have a random boner, and so on. Anyway, so on and so forth. All right. Anyway, so yeah. So anyway, so anyway. Now, anyway, so on and so forth. Anyway, now I want to make love come back. And so I never know what my stuff is going to do. A few of my videos have blown up. The speech on sexuality got is like at 10,000 views, over 35 likes. Thank you for the positive reactions to that. But when I was making that speech, my level of knowledge as to the nature of the truth was imperfect. Some of what I said there was wrong. And so the description of that video contains amendments to any claims that were inaccurate. And this video as well is amending any claims that were inaccurate in that speech, because I'm nearer to the truth now than I was then, and so on. Anyway, so I Deus ex machina means God from the machine, or a person who turns hopeless situation into a happy ending. And so I want to do that on the scale of the entire civilization, because I consider the whole civilization to be a hopeless situation. So anyway, and so anyway, now if a female human wanted only size, all right, she could mold the dildo to her specifications, attach it to a machine in which she could program or vary the stroke frequency, and have sex with that. Such machines do indeed exist. We're basically, um, we're basically, you could have sex with the machine. Now, ultimately, choosing a partner based on solely primal or sexual things gets you nowhere. And so I was talking to a fellow who said, I married the best ass I'd ever seen, but she was crazy, and it didn't last very long. All right. And then similarly, a female could marry or be with a guy who is one of the biggest dicks she's ever seen or felt inside of her, and then find out that there are other things about that guy that are bad, or basically, undesirable, right? And so basing marriage decision on mainly physical or primal attraction gets you nowhere. And so what leads to lasting marriage is often things that are meta to sexuality: emotional, intellectual connection, shared personality traits, shared interests and activities, and so on. Then you build a life together. Also, complementary nature, where you can both learn from each other and have different skills in different areas that make both of you more complete people by your association with each other, right? And so, guy marries best ass he's ever seen, doesn't last very long, she's kind of crazy, all right? They get divorced. Woman marries guy with one of the biggest dicks she's seen or felt inside of her. It turns out there's other things about him that are not good, right? Now again, if a woman wants size, she can mold dildo, attach it to a machine where she can vary stroke frequency, have sex with that machine. These machines do exist. You can get them. They're sex machines. Attach a dildo to them, right? You can have sex with a machine, all right? And so Will and Ariel Durant is an example of basically, a marriage that has lasted, where they wrote the story of civilization, which is 11 novels together as a couple, right? And so basically they had that intellectual project and connection that that they kept them together, and it was something they worked on together. They died within weeks of each other at the same hospital, and they wrote 11 volumes of detailing the human history of human civilization and so on. All right, very very excellent, piece of work. All right, anyway, right, as a couple, right, and so basically, there's that level of connection. Anyway, and so on and so forth. Anyway, now, so on and so forth. Anyway, um, anyway, so yeah. Anyway, yeah. So yeah. Anyway, so yeah. Anyway, yeah. So anyway, yeah, yeah. So anyway, um, yeah. So anyway, um, yeah, yeah. So yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, yeah. If any woman wants to test me at present, to like have me prove that I'm not a liar or something, I'm potent now. I can maintain my peak now. I can also last long and not have premature ejaculation, and so I can verifiably maintain my peak insertable bone press of about 8.8, with about 6 shaft girths, with about 6.7 around glands, and will be, as per that skilled image with me and Julio, where I look to be comparable to Julio, similar length, slightly thinner in the shaft, but then larger glands. All right, so I guarantee multiple orgasms if a woman wants to test me that I'm not a liar. All right, and so in the past, when I said I had a 10-inch cock, is it because I'm a liar? No, it's because we live in a world where everyone is lying and exaggerating. All right, and so again, my peak bone press, which is 8.8, equals 12 or 13 in the porn star exaggeration scale. Julio's peak, which was 9.5, was 14 for him. All right. So if you want to call me a liar for saying I had a 10-inch cock, note that if I was a porn star, my size would be exaggerated to 12 or 13. Julio was 14. So 9.5 bone press on Julio. He's 5'9". He has short, compact legs. His dick looks large for his height. All right. Then he exaggerates that to 14. Myself, tall. All right. 6'3" and a half, barefoot, 8.8 peak bone press. All right. I'd get exaggerated to 12 or 13. In terms of mathematics and ratios, 9.5 on Julio to 14, 8.8 on me to 13. All right. So humbly, I'd be 12 or 13 in porn. And so I'm a liar for saying I had a 10-inch cock. It was said in jest because we live in a world that's silly where everything gets exaggerated. And so my peak bone press is 8.8 realistically, but that doesn't even exaggerate to 10 on the porn star scale. It exaggerates to 12 or 13. All right. The picture I look comparable to Julio is illustrative of all I'm saying, and so on. This, that, and the other. All right. So if I say, oh, my peak bone press is 8.8, it's not going to be understood what the fuck that means. If I say I have a 10-inch cock, all right, then this is going to get more attention because everything is just exaggerated. Ultimately, I could have said I had a 12 or 13-inch cock because 8.8 equals 13, or 12, 9.5 equals 14. All right, mathematically in terms of converting to the porn star exaggerated scale. Anyway, so on and so forth. But if I'm flaccid, and freezing, I could be 4 inches. So go fucking figure. Then if I'm sick with a high fever and virus and I'm not potent, I could be fucking a woman with my flaccid, which is 5.5 inches. All right. Anyway, so on and so forth. If anyone wants to test me, I guarantee multiple orgasms for that woman. If you want sex from me now, I'm potent. I can maintain my peak and restrain premature ejaculation. A woman 11 years older than me said she had 4 orgasms with me one time and her legs were shaking. So 4 leg shaking orgasms or something in one session with me a long time ago. Anyway, so yeah. Anyway, um, so on and so forth. Um, yeah. Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, so I appreciate the sexuality speech blowing up, but honestly, on listening to it, my knowledge as to the nature of the truth was imperfect. Much of what I said was good, but some of the claims were inaccurate, and so this video has amended some of those inaccurate claims, and the description of that speech also amends some of the inaccurate claims made in that speech. But indeed, some of the sections were very profound. I was completely improvising the entire thing, and so one of the quotes that came out of me was the following: "Envy is the occupation of the unwise." What that means is that an occupation is a job or something you spend your time doing. And so if you spend your time looking outwards at what other people have and wishing you had that, you're wasting your time. And so instead, you should look inwards at what you have and how you can make best with what you have and how you can contribute to civilization with what you have. And indeed, what is not known by many people is that the universe is a very odd and quaint machine where anything that is worth envying, once again, anything that is worth envying also comes along with some kind of curse or some or some list of cons. All right, anything that is worth envying often comes with some kind of hidden curse or something that makes it bad. All right, and so on and so forth. All right, and so this is precisely why envy is the occupation of the unwise. All right, anything you could envy, anything that is worth envying, comes along with some kind of curse that makes it as well bad or undesirable, and so on and so forth. And so this, that, and the other. All right, and so look inwards at what you have instead of spending your time looking outwards and envying what others have, and so on and so forth. And so a person is to make the most of what they have, and so on and so forth. An occupation is a job. Make sure that envy is not your occupation or job, because then you would be unwise. Time spent envying is time lost. Time spent looking inwards at what you have and how you could best contribute or with what you have is how time should be spent. All right, an occupation is a job. Do not make envy your job. All right. An occupation is also what you do with your time. All right. So on and so forth. Anyway, so on and so forth. Anyway, um, yeah, I'm going to end this one here because I have to find stopping points for these things. This has been Deus Ex Machina.